Welcome, Cassie. It seemed like you are going to handle this on your own. There is no other partner in
That's
crime, so
okay.
just me and you. So
That's
I've heard
great.
like a lot about you, and I think like I've met you a couple of times in the
Yeah,
𝗲𝗲 initiative on the 𝗙cie side
that's
on
right.
multiple occasions. So I know like most of the people would already know you, but
But
based on the model that we have, maybe if you can spend maybe a minute or two talking about your journey in security.
sure. Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here for the dialogue. I am Vice President for Supply Chain Security and a Product Security Officer at Schneider Electric. We are a 34 billion euro company headquartered in Paris, France. And I've been with the company 13 years, but I live in the Bay Area. I have been focusing in security for, I guess, 8.5 years, but I've been in technology, started as a developer 35 years ago, so quite a long time ago, and moved in different technology leadership roles, quite a lot of development leadership. And so I really came into the security space as an avid fan. I worked at McAfee back in the mid-90s. And so I definitely had my understanding of where we were going, and the moment went back into security, I knew I was back home. I'm very, passionate about the application security community, especially I work with a lot of IoT and OT products in addition to digital software and cloud. So I've got the whole scope within our range.
And I'm sure you can actually spend a lot of time on 𝗲𝗲 with
Yes,
what's
yes.
happening, right?
And
So
I
I'll probably
have
touch
been
upon.
very active in the software bill of materials community over the last several years. Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like we'll probably park some minutes for talking about the 𝗲𝗲 towards the tail end. But given you have like been through the journey, like some of us, right? So maybe I'll start with the first question, right? How essential is to have an executive buy-in for AppSec programs for your respective organization? How critical is that?
It is absolutely critical. I think that there are people who have such a good heart and who want to focus on the security topics, but even in those situations, I work a lot with startups and small businesses as suppliers of our products and or libraries or things like that. And that attention that their executives have makes all the difference in the world. So I talk with CISOs as we're working on contracts, and they may have just starting the journey for application security, which means that from a maturity level, we have to take more of the responsibility as a enterprise company. So I've heard a lot today on the startups, and how they work with and small businesses, and how BSIM and some of the other maturity models are much larger. But I'm working every day with people who are just still starting that journey. Their first MVP of a product may be just, let's say, very limited from a standpoint of going through SaaS and DaaS. So being able to bring it in-house and run it through more detailed scans, or provide them with our foundation of what we require for, if we use it for an enterprise application, we have an application certification process, so that we are having that consultative almost work that we do with either our application partners that we're purchasing from, or something we bring in-house. So I think that anyone, especially those in CIO roles, CISO roles, anybody who's got technology responsibilities, such as VP of engineering, needs to make this a priority. We're not going to be able to stop the malicious actor. We have to stand up, just like we did with quality issues, 15, 20 years ago.
Very relevant. So maybe a relevant question on this topic is, who are the decision makers for the right sizing your maturity level that you want to achieve, and are those the right set of people, right? It might be a controversial question, but Like who do you think are right fit for making decisions on?
Well, I think that the bar needs to be set more at a governance organization and not within, from a detail level. Development teams, absolutely, if you've got bug bars or anything else at that level, they need to have a consistent measurement for criteria of, when they're evaluating, for example, when they're running it through a scanning tool. But I think the overall responsibility lies really at some of the senior leadership of what is acceptable and what's not. Some companies may have, let's say if they're API first or cloud first, it's 0 vulnerabilities. But if you're working with devices or have certain open source and you run it an hour later and new CVEs, you've got to have that agreed upon discussion and an escalation path. So there needs to be that visibility for when you want to release, let's just say whether it be on an hourly basis, if you're not changing the architecture, but something new comes in, but yet it could be a 0 day. So what do? You need to practice and have that in place for vulnerability in AppSec, just like you do for incident management and incident response.
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking, right? I mean, I used to run like BCP many years ago. So essentially what we used to do needs to happen there, right?
Yes.
Instead of just having like a table say, you need to be able to actually quantify and measure your time that you actually take from trying to detect up to remediation itself, right? How quickly can you react on this?
Right. And if you can't react right away, because there may not be a fix, especially in a 0 day situation, if you're using open source, you need to have, you need to make sure that your executives aware, because they're not usually developers. I mean, we're lucky in the startup industry where a lot of them are very technical, but in normal corporations, they see something on the news and they're going to react.
So we touched upon slightly on the metrics, right? So maybe a question on metrics. How do you leverage metrics in your decision making, and which metrics are relevant to your AppSec teams, your developers, and even your management?
Sure. Well, I think there were some great discussions earlier about the metrics on here. So I recommend anybody who's listening later to don't miss that section. I think that, so if you're starting at the management level, I think being able to understand the maturity. So I believe that groups take different times to mature. So we talked about training earlier. So I can't expect someone to understand and even become mildly familiar with application security if I don't do the appropriate training and provide appropriate background. So I think training and any adoption metrics, like how many people are accessing the scanning tools if it's not part of the build, and those are important to me. It's the people metrics that matter. How are we supporting them and understanding it? I've seen reports and they just get filed away because they don't understand what that CWE, the common weakness enumeration, really means. They don't get it. If it's not part of the OWASP top 10, or if it's somewhere deeper in the list, they don't know how to fix it. So they sort of, put blinders on and move on to the next thing. So I think that working with the people and figuring out what metrics work for everyone. It could be number of hours training. It could be something at that, that level for the company. It just depends on the type of group. The other thing from so as part of that, adoption of the security lifecycle is important. It's a maturity. I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? You don't expect people to be brilliant and experts 1 week after a training class. It takes them time to learn how to use it. In 𝗖cie 62443, which is industrial controls secure development lifecycle, it talks and goes through this set of requirements, but I don't expect everybody to be perfect at those requirements the first time they go through it. It takes time to build that skill set. So I think that monitoring the applied usage of the maturity. It's not then putting it on a finger on somebody. It's not, how many vulnerabilities did this, because if you're looking at lines of code, I mean, you can't do a comparison. And then there's one metric that I do like, that I'm not sure if it was talked about earlier, is going back to just vulnerabilities for a second, is if you do pen testing, if the pen testing group finds something in the first 5 minutes, in the first hour, I think there's some weakness and some learnings. If you've got an external pen test going on and it takes them several days, a week, they've got to stand on their head and do 15 different variations to get something working. That complexity of how easy it was to really take down the system, to own it, is an important metric, just from a maturity standpoint. And not criticizing or chastising or taking to task anybody that did not get to that level. It takes a long time to reach that maturity, but it's the responsibility of those that are experts, is to walk through with those that don't have that knowledge, especially if you've got turnover on your team, to bring them to a level. So bringing in consultants, bringing in groups that have that experience is really important.
Brilliant, brilliant. I know we have only 4 minutes left, but I also conscious of, so we have a focus on SBOM within our maturity model that we are standing up, right? But I want to understand from your perspective, like, where do you actually bring in SBOM within the conversation within the organization? At what maturity level does SBOM becomes relevant, and how do you operationalize SBOM within your respective organization?
Okay, so SBOM originally was and still is considered software transparency. And as a developer, we had a closed box. It was, nobody saw what we were doing. It was all secret, hush hush. It gives a level of transparency that maybe only the build manager or a couple people ever saw. So I think that there's a couple key points that developers that we will learn and be able to use from SBOMs is, first off, if I'm building a module and I'm using this open source library, and somebody over there is using the same open source library, different version, there's conversations you can have just by reviewing the SBOM, right? You can say, okay, well, is there some redundancy? Are we not doing linking properly? What do we need to do? There can be some complexity, especially in a larger system. Another area is it's helping with technical debt, and it will help us a lot more with technical debt. If you know that you have to show this to someone in the future for procurement, where you might have discounted updating that end of life open source project, or that let's just say it's way back version. Take OpenSSL, for example. There are deprecated versions that you need to be removing of OpenSSL. And when somebody has the ability to see that and run it through scanning tools with an SBOM, I think it's going to help the technical debt and efficiency within our code, which, the more we can trim and clean and keep that hygiene up as developers will help. And so those are the main things from SBOMs that I see are going to help the AppSec and the developer community.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I know, like, we have 1 minute left. So any final parting thoughts or final words that you want to share?
Well, so there's been a lot of excellent experts on the call and this discussion today. But what I want people to realize, it's called a journey for a reason. And I mentioned that we're starting out from literally, in some cases, no knowledge of what application security and product security is. And so the more that people listen to this and understand the maturity model, we're not expecting, you don't get to a CMM level or just a maturity level of 4 or 5 an hour from now or a day from now. It's going to take years, even for enterprise organizations, to reach a level. But you've got to start somewhere. So if you haven't done, just even some of the basics, start there and don't compare yourself to everybody else. Just work on your maturity, and that's the main goal.
Thank you, Cassie. I mean, like, it was great chatting with you, and had the opportunity of having a one-on-one discussion with you.
Great. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.